Hi everybody, so this is beautiful Becca. Welcome to another Becca's Book Talks. If you are new to my channel, hello and welcome. Don't forget to click like and subscribe to my channel. Well, today we have an acclaimed renowned author, Lisa C. is in the house, and it was really sweet. I had asked her earlier if I could do an interview, and she wanted to see a few interview episodes before committing. She just literally finished her book, Lady Tan's Circle of Women, and it's being released to the public on June 3rd, I believe, this year. And I had asked her about doing an interview to discuss again the set questionnaire that I usually will send out, and but I did want to ask her about the story itself. And so she was kind enough to send me what they call an ARC. Now, if anyone does not know what the term ARC means, ARC is an acronym for Advanced Reader's Copy. And usually this will be sent to people who have expressed interest in an author's works, and they've been following them for like a while, and maybe they can ask if they could leave a review to get so that the author can gain more momentum once the book is published to the public, basically. And so I was the Kindle Fire. I had a bunch of technical troubleshooting that I had to deal with first, but she managed to send it to me through as an ebook through NetGalley. I finally was able to get to get it through, but not until after I think her publicist agreed to send me a print version. This literally came today. So I got up to, I'm like maybe, possibly about 120 pages away from finishing, but it is a really unique book. I'm going to be interviewing her today, so let's get started. Okay, awesome. So everyone, this is beautiful Becca, and I have with me author Lisa C. So Lisa, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
How are you doing?
Great. I live in Southern California. This is our first truly sunny day in forever.
Absolutely. So you do live in Southern California, and do you live in the San Fernando Valley? Are you local?
I'm in Los Angeles, but not in the Valley.
Okay, yeah, I'm from the San Fernando Valley. So, but yeah, I was just I literally just finished watching nothing to do with Lady Tan, but I literally just finished watching the Huntington Museum special on your collaboration with Nathan Wang for on Gold Mountain, and you were saying that you live in fire hazard neighborhood, and I cannot believe that thing happened with those 12 homes. I just was like, what?
I know, just crazy. But it inspired the gift that I gave them. So it all worked out for the best. And then actually this year with all the flooding, for the first time ever, our garage flooded, and I had the mural in there from my grandfather's restaurant, Dragon's Den, that I wrote about on Gold Mountain. And it was a big rescue to get them out of there before they were damaged. Wow. And then the next morning I called the Huntington and said, come and get them quick. So two disasters on my end have ended up being wonderful gifts for them.
So, so I literally, it was weird. I thought somebody rang the doorbell, and I thought it was an Amazon. I wasn't expecting anything from Amazon. But instead I felt the package, and can you see this?
Yep.
Yep. So it literally,
you can hold them up together.
I literally just got this today, but it's a good thing. I actually was able, after some technical troubleshooting, I managed to actually get it on my Kindle. So I got up to, I want to say I got up to part 3, up to where it says, a snake always sheds its skin. So we will get to Lady Tan in as soon, whoops, as I get my notes here. So did you get a chance to look over the questionnaire?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So for those of you for those of you that are new to the channel, this is actually part of a video podcast called Becca's Book Talks, and I interview with local authors, librarians, hopefully sometime at YouTube influencers to possibly eventually celebrities who are avid readers like myself. So Lisa, what are the top 10 books that have actually influenced your life and in your profession, whether it be personal narratives or stories that have left a lasting impression on you, and why?
Well, I don't know if I can do 10, but I'll do
Okay.
5. So the first is called Amelia Ran and the Magic Ring. It was a children's book that my grandmother found at a thrift shop. And it's very rare, very hard to find. Only about 1,200 of them were made. But I have a long story behind that one, so maybe we'll circle back to that. I would say Angle of Repose by Wallace Stegner. I used a couple of lines from that book as the epigraph for On Gold Mountain. I'll just paraphrase. I mean, it's pretty close. Fooling around in the papers my grandparents, especially my grandmother, left behind. I get glimpses of lives close to mine. I wish I could live in their clothes a while. And of course, that worked so perfectly for On Gold Mountain, but I didn't realize that that was going to be kind of the way that I would write, the way that I would look forward and think about my writing, is that I just wanted to live in the characters' clothes a while. I would then have to list 2 of my mother's books. My mother was Carolyn C. And so the first of those is Golden Days, which is the end of the world novel set here, actually mostly in Topanga, with a happy ending. And I'll just tell you the happy ending, you know, it's the end of the nuclear apocalypse. And so the sand on the ocean, by the ocean, has turned to glass, and everyone is out just at the foot of Topanga, sliding on this glass in the waves, by the waves. And then her other one that I just loved so much is called The Handyman. And this is about a handyman a young man who's trying to figure out his life. He wants to be an artist. He's not really sure what his subject is, what his direction is, but he wants to be an artist. And as he goes from house to house throughout Los Angeles, all the different neighborhoods, while he's not a very good handyman, he finally discovers his vision. And to me, it's so much about the arts, you know, and being an artist, whether you're a painter or a writer or a musician or a dancer, and how you find your voice. Yeah. I would say the first of the Michael Connelly novels. I love his work. I think he's one of the few writers who, you know, turns out a book a year, who stays consistently good. And of course, that first Bosch book, I just think was great, and, you know, just set the pattern for a wonderful, wonderful series. There was another series of books that my mother loved when she was a little girl, and then I read, by Elizabeth Enright. They were called it's a family called the Saturdays, and they don't have a lot of money, and this is during or after World War II in England. And so all the little children in this family pool their money, and every Saturday one goes out and takes that money and has an adventure.
Cute.
Yeah, so I think I've been listening to on audio books, the collected works of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. You can see, I guess I like mysteries a lot, but they are so good. And of course, I hadn't read them since I was a child, you know, but to come back and read them, and the language is fantastic. The rhythm of the words and the sentences are fantastic. Let's see, what else? Well, I think that's 5 or 6. I think that's a nice number off the top.
You were going to come back to one. I'm not sure which one you were going to come back to. I think it was either Amelia Ran. What was it called? Amelia Ran Around the Ring.
Ran in the Magic Ring.
Ran in the Magic Ring.
Book when I was a child, and my younger sister lost it.
Oh.
And so really badly about that. And then when I turned 50, We went out for lunch and with my mom, and she gave me this thing wrapped up, and I just tore the edge, and I could see it was the back of the book. I mean, I like recognized the color, and she had been on a search to find a copy for years
Oh my
because,
goodness.
like I said, only 1,200 published. Obviously, not very many had survived.
Yeah.
And what was interesting was my mom started reading it out loud over lunch, and I could remember it so clearly. But what struck all of us was how much I'd kind of grown up to be like Amelia Rand, like taken a lot of her character and felt it for my, and wanted to be like that, I guess.
Nice. And you're the second,
I'll tell you another one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Jungle Books, not the Jungle Book with Mowgli. There are two parts. There's part one and part two, or book one and book two. So I'm talking about book two, which is the collection of short stories. And the first of those short stories is Rikki Tikki Tavi. Every
Wow.
Saturday morning for years when I was a kid, I would read that short story before I got out of bed
Ricky
in the
Bobby.
mornings.
Yeah.
I think the books that have had the most influence on me are the ones from my childhood.
Okay. So I'm sorry, I wasn't able to hear that one. So that was the one by Richard. I'm sorry, not Richard. Rudyard Kipling.
Rudyard Kipling.
Got it. Okay. And you listen to Arthur Conan Doyle. You're the second person to mention Angle of Repose by
Wallace Stegner.
Wallace Stegner. Yeah. Avi also mentioned that he also I think he recently read that one just a few months ago. But what exactly does it mean by the Angle of Repose? What exactly? How do you what was an inspiration about that?
So the angle of repose is actually a mining term. So it's, if you hear that, it doesn't really have a whole lot to do with the novel. It is a historical novel. It's actually based on the true stories and even the diaries of a woman who was married to like a geological engineer, I think is a better way to put it, who was in Leadville, Colorado. And so it's a great, big story of the West. It's women in the West. It's a story of a marriage. And it's really great. And, Wallace Stegner, he was such a wonderful writer. He's best known for, oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank on the title. And every time I tried to read it when I was younger, I just kept thinking, I'm too young for this book. Like it's too early for me to be reading it. But I haven't had a chance now that I am old enough to actually sit down and read it.
That's cool. I'll need to look into that one. So Wallace Stegner, yeah, I wrote that down from Avi as well. So of those books that you mentioned, which one do you think would you recommend for today's readers, especially now for this readership community, from everything that's been happening?
Well, I mean, Angle of Repose is a timeless book. I mean, it's a classic, and I would recommend that to anyone. Another one that's real. Two more I'm going to put on The Grapes of Wrath, which I feel is very timely for now. And then while I was talking, I should have written them all down, but I didn't. It's another big one like that. Oh, I know, Lonesome Dove. And Lonesome Dove, of course, looks like it's just a cowboy western, just they're driving the cattle from here to there, but it is epic. And actually, that's a book that my mother not only would read, well, of course, she taught it every year in her classes at UCLA, and because of that, she read it every year, and it's just beautifully written. It's a great friendship story. It tells you so much about the West, and I think, except for maybe Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, I think almost all of these stories are very Western in theme.
That's cool. So your mother taught at UCLA. Was she like a pre-English literature professor or something?
She taught in the English department. She taught literature and writing.
That's awesome. That's really cool. So both your mother and your father are both writers.
No, my father was an anthropologist.
Oh, I'm sorry, anthropologist. Okay, okay. Okay. So, with the stories in mind, what was the last story that you actually, if you had a chance at all, but I mean, what was the last story that you read and what were your thoughts and takeaways from that read?
Well, the last story we just finished the other night. So my husband and I, when we go to bed, we listen to an audiobook. And he every night he asks me, do you want 5, 10, or 15 minutes? You know, that's the timer. We turn off the light, we hold hands, and we get a nighttime story, and it's wonderful. So those books, we're very careful on what we listen to because it can't be too exciting because otherwise you wouldn't be able to go to sleep. It has to be someone with a really nice voice. So this was the most recent in the series of the Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osborne. And we liked it a lot, but I'll tell you, I was on vacation earlier this year, and the book that I absolutely loved and am recommending to everyone is Lessons in Chemistry.
Yes.
Loved it.
Yes.
Just
Yes. Absolutely. That I got a chance to well no, I didn't get a chance to, but I actually wrote to Bonnie Garmis to see about possibly interviewing her, and she is completely booked for this entire year because I guess because well, Lessons in Chemistry. Now I don't remember if it's supposed to be on Netflix or HBO, but it's already into like I guess like
right.
a TV. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, Brie Larson, who starred in a room, but I cannot but wow. I was just, I mean, because usually what I do is when I read a book that I become so invested in, I don't have it with me at the moment, but I have a bunch of journals and I will write down quotes. I will write down descriptions. I will write down even an entire paragraph, maybe even an entire chapter. Like for instance, what's her name? Isabel Allende. The first book I read of hers was The House of the Spirits, and I think the
Beautiful.
first, yes, I think the first chapter was called. It was the older sister, Rosa, and it was so descriptive. But it's like when I read, I don't realize that I'm reading. It's like the words themselves appear as images, like right off the
Mhm.
page, and I don't. I'm not, I don't think I am, I don't believe I'm dyslexic at all, but I just read and visualize things differently. But yeah,
Right.
Lessons in Chemistry was, that I think was the best book so far this year. So
Without question. And it came out last year, and it's one of those books that kind of came out of nowhere, was a huge surprise, a huge hit. Um, so we were on vacation in Hawaii, and I there were 5 people around the pool who were reading, hard copies. I don't know how many people were reading it on their Kindles or their phones, but all of us who kept seeing other people with the hard copy was like, "Where are you? Are you liking it?" And it was men and women and people who were younger and who were older, and it, it's profound in a lot of ways, but it's also very funny.
yes,
I mean, you
yeah.
find it just, there were parts I would just laugh out loud, by the pool around a bunch of strangers.
Did you laugh when she mentioned how they named the dog 6:30?
And I mean, just I loved the dog. I loved his thought process and, what he observed. I just thought that I loved that. I loved it.
Yeah, yeah. If you want, I'm not sure if you got a chance to look at some of the other videos, but the first one I did for this, not the well, no, well, yeah, I guess the first one for this particular year was the Pop Sugar Reading Book Challenge, and I mentioned the book that I literally just finished. It was book 2, which was Lessons in Chemistry, and I discuss what had occurred in the story. But my favorite is when she's on the show and she's telling these women, you know, you are already empowered. You shouldn't let your age, you shouldn't let you're not past your prime. What's stopping you? What I love about um Elizabeth Zott, what I love about her is that her character is very, very frank, very blunt, and she tells it like it is. She's not hiding anything, which is gusto.
She doesn't have any filter.
Exactly. Exactly.
And all those poor men who have to deal with her.
Hmm.
And it's the 1950s and they don't know what's happening to them.
Yeah. And I loved her. I get the most heartbreaking and I think the most shock was Calvin Evans. I wasn't expecting that to happen. It was just like, what do you mean he's here and then he's gone? What? Excuse me?
Mhm.
That just shocked me. Um, are you taking, I mean, right now, because Lady Ten is on its way to being published and um, being,
Released.
yeah, released in June to the masses, but are you now taking part or have you ever taken part in a reading challenge with your local library or group or any time it's challenge at the present moment?
Not since I was a child. The thing is when I'm writing, I don't read fiction. And so that means I go a long time, long stretches without reading fiction. The audio book at night, I kind of put in a different category, the Thursday
Murder Club?
club, this isn't deep. They're fun to listen to, but it's not, I mean, they're kind of brain candy, that it's not something I know there are a lot of writers who will read a novel a week or a novel every day or every couple of days, but I'm writing these historical novels and I have to really put myself in that time period, in that place, and it's kind of like I have to have blinders on to the outside world.
Mhm.
Um, there are things like I can't say, I hope I would never write a sentence like this, but I can't say the feeling was electric if they haven't had invented electricity yet. I
Interesting.
remember when I was working on Snowflower and the Secret Fan, I wanted to use the word naive, but naive, it is so French. I mean, it's really French, right?
Hmm.
And but to say childlike, naive has more nuance to me than childlike. But I couldn't use it because there was no way that two little girls in the 18th century in a remote village in China would have ever heard that word. So I just don't want anybody else's voice or words to seep into my head, even inadvertently. So that's what I mean. I'm very much like this. And then when I finish a book, I go on a big reading tear. And so and it's kind of all over. I like to read, like whatever the new Michael Connelly is. I do love mysteries. I love a good mystery. I'll read what I'll call the girl books: Girl on a Train, Girl in a Window, Gone Girl. Um, there's the one that's just being about to be on television as a series. Maybe it's already started. The last time I saw him, I sort of include that in the girl type books. Um, I always look for a book that's on the bestseller list that came out of nowhere, like Lessons in Chemistry. The one previous to that would be, what's the one where she's down in the sort of swampy area and she's been abandoned.
I'm not
I
quite sure.
want
I
to
don't
say
think I read it, but I'm thinking, is it when the crawdads thing? Is that the one?
Project. I would guess that one. And so that was a book the publisher had no expectations for, and it took off in this phenomenal way worldwide. And the reason I'm interested in those books is because that happened to me. That happened with Snowflower and the Secret Fan. Nobody thought anybody was going to read that book. I mean, the expectations across the board were very, very low. And then it took off in this extraordinary way and was translated into 39 languages. And even people will often ask me, like, what was it about that book that, made it take off like that? Well, if I knew, I would do that every single time. And the thing is, nobody knows. It's like it hits the country or the world at the exact right time. For whatever reason, it's hitting at the exact right moment. And so I'm always just curious to sort of, read that, whatever that one that's kind of popped up on the list and is just out of nowhere. Like, why does that happen? It's the same with the Bonnie Garmus book. So, and then the last thing is I try to read something that I have missed, a classic of some sort. And the last one for me was Ask the Dust by John Fonte. And John Fonte lived here in Los Angeles. There's a John Fonte Square in downtown Los Angeles. I've driven through it or been driven through it literally thousands of times in my life, I think. But until last year, I had never read it. And so I finally did, and I'm glad I did. But you know, it's just those books that sometimes they're a classic and you miss them.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll admit this. I've never read To Kill a Mockingbird.
I
I'm like
tried.
one of the only people in the world who hasn't read it. So
Uh,
you know
uh,
that get there.
I haven't read it
Yeah.
either, to be honest with you. But I remember
Because we
reading.
just have like,
Yeah, yeah,
go ahead.
yeah. Sorry, there seems to be like a cutoff on the voice thing here. But yeah, I haven't. I have. I mean, I tried reading To Kill a Mockingbird. I don't think it was for. I don't remember ever reading it for class. We had different ways of reading the novels that were assigned to us. But To Kill a Mockingbird, I remember trying to read through the first two pages, and I conked out. I just couldn't. And was just there was nothing. I don't really know. There was nothing really to like push it forward for me to continue reading it. It just was like, and it's the same thing with like,
It is one of the, you know, the great classics of American literature,
hmm
and you know, probably outsells. You know, it's probably in the top 10 books each year of total sales. So you know, it missed us, but plenty of other people are reading it, and it is, of course, really important. My husband became a lawyer because he read that book when he was 12, and we just had dinner the other day with somebody who also said he became a lawyer because he read that book when he was a child or young, and that was the thing that you know turned him into to wanting to be a lawyer. My husband was in a judge's chambers about a month ago, and he had a poster of To Kill a Mockingbird. Same thing, that he read this book when he was young, and this is what turned him into a lawyer and eventually a judge. So that book has had a pretty profound influence.
impact.
I bet if you ask, you know, lawyers around the country how many were inspired by To Kill a Mockingbird, I think there were a lot.
Yeah, it's amazing how stories can leave an out just a lasting influence, but also have people decide what to do. In fact, I'm not sure if you saw the first interview, but it was with our book club leader, well, my mother's book club leader, Susan Selmer. She's a big, dedicated fan of your work. But because of your stories of China that she actually ended up traveling to China. And I don't know if she's doing it now or she will be going to maybe this summer. She's going to be going to Japan, also based on one of your stories. I'm not quite sure which story that is.
I think you meant Jeju Island.
Did you? Well,
In,
not well. No, she said that
yeah,
she's going
that's
to
what
Japan.
the last book is about. Yeah, but you know, I hear from people all the time. You know, just this last week, I had emails from two people who were sending photos of their trips to Jeju, and you know, they had gone because they'd read The Island of Sea Women.
Yeah, yeah. That was a pretty. That book alone was a very oof, that wasn't like it's like it's one of those. It centers around an incident that it's interesting that as an American student, because I took what was it called? I took Eastern Civilization at College of the Canyons here in the Valley. And you know, there's only so much that we are taught in the curriculum. But this was an incident that I had never ever heard of before, and you highlighted it with such detail, and it was just I was not expecting that. I mean, I could literally see it happening in front of me like a movie camera, and I was just there were times when I would hyperventilate just by reading it. So yeah. Do you ever that was an I mean not to go off tangent here, but do you find when you're writing like the dialogue or the action of these very dark uh horrendous events, do you sometimes when you're writing, do you often do you did it ever like do you ever like stop and think
if I write this, am I going to scare myself out of reading it? Has that ever happened?
Maybe a variation of that, which is, um, a different example would be the Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane, where there's something that happens in the second chapter that is really shocking. And, I get to decide where that's going to be, so is it in the beginning, the middle, of the end? Why is it there? What's the ripple effect? But what you don't want is for people to like get to that part and be like, oh my God, I can't read another page of this. So it's how, I think that it is something that I think about. And the things that happen in my books are there for a reason. I'm not just throwing it in to be gratuitous. I mean, again, they're historical novels and history happens. We often don't learn history in the reality of it, I think. So to me, it's really important to be, it's not only important, it's respectful to honor the truth of what happened. And yet, that said, I think it can be a risk because you're treading a fine line of this is really hard for sometimes for people to get through.
Yeah.
But I hope that by the time they get to these things, that they're already invested enough in the characters and in the emotions that they want to see it through, they want to see it through to the end.
Yeah. But speaking of the readers that you were talking about, the challenges or that books that have a lasting influence, like To Kill a Mockingbird, which your husband became a lawyer because of that. But for books that are leaving a lasting impression on readers today, but to others, it's also causing a lot of questions of what they are reading, which then leads me into this question here. What do you think is the biggest obstacle that is facing our readers today in the current in the wake of the current banned or challenge book lists from this last year alone, considering the students, the teachers, the library, book clientele? What do you think is the biggest obstacle that we're facing right now?
That is the biggest challenge. I mean, the banning books is particularly in schools, but and we see in places like Florida where it's going far beyond just let's say elementary schools, all the way through to public libraries. And what the research shows is the more you read, it's provable, the more you read, the more empathy you have. And I think as a country, as a people, we could use more empathy to have better understanding of people who are not like us. But beyond that, why do we want to shut off people's minds? Why would you want to put up roadblocks around what people can be exposed to? And who are, you to tell me what I can read and not read? I do think, parents can have a say, should have a say in what their own child reads. Parents can, I've had, we were out to dinner with some people the other day and the other night, and they told us that their 9-year-old daughter had read Island of Sea Women. And I was like, what? I would never let my 9-year-old read that book. But she's a very sophisticated reader. The mother had read it ahead of time. And I think there's a lot to be said for a parent to, read ahead of time some books that could be considered more challenging. Some kids are further along in being mature than others. Sometimes people may have religious reasons or other kinds of reasons, but that's personal. And I don't know that it's a government's role to tell everyone what they can and cannot read. I think it's much more individual. And then the last thing I'll say about that, and it's because I've had some responses sometimes to my work, I think, of Peony in Love. And in Peony in Love, I'm not giving anything hugely away, but the main character dies on page 99, and the rest of the book is told from her perspective as a ghost. And it's very much about the Chinese vision or version of the afterlife, which is very different. I mean, there's some similarities to heaven and hell, but there are some things that are very unique to it. And I remember once this woman saying to me, I just didn't like that book because that's not my belief system. And it's like, well, my feeling is like, so I'm curious about other people's belief systems. I don't have to just have my own belief system and not take in anything else. And I wonder, what is the threat there? What's the anxiety about that? That if it's not my belief system, my beliefs aren't strong enough that I can hold on to my beliefs and still learn about other ways that people think or have faith. I just don't agree with that. I think the more we know, the more empathetic we can be, the more understanding we will have. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I think this is the greatest, a really important and grave threat.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with that. So I'm not sure
if you think about the countries that have implemented book banning and book burning, these are not models of good behavior or good outcomes, right? Mm-hmm. We don't look at Nazi Germany and, gee, let's emulate that. I mean, that shouldn't be what we're looking to as a beacon of how we should be treating books and reading.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of the things that I taught my students when I was teaching high school English, American literature. The book I taught every year was Fahrenheit 451, and I would talk about the book bans, and I would talk about there was this. I don't think it was until the second year I was teaching, I introduced them to, and I'm not sure if you've seen this collection, but I was very shocked to see it myself. It was this Disney collection of World War II, and there was this cartoon called The March of Death. Did you see that one? Or hear of it? It's the most.
I haven't, no.
It's the most outrageous, but I think it's the darkest film short. It tells from, even though it's a Disney cartoon, but it's probably the most darkest animated short for its time, telling of what these children are going through in Germany. They're not being taught to be students. They're being taught to become soldiers. Just like, and we recently saw it, I think it was last month, the, what's his face? The director, Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio version of Collodi's story. I'm not sure if you've seen that.
I haven't, no.
I would definitely recommend seeing that film, because you see the character Lampwick. I don't know if you're familiar with the Collodi story, but Lampwick is being raised not just as a fascist boy, but he's also being taught as a boy to become a soldier while he's still a boy. And that's basically what the March of Death was about. These children are being they're being brainwashed. They are being, even their parents, like, I think you even mentioned in Lady Tan, who was the child to obey first, the mother or the grandmother? I got to that part where Lady Tan is questioning who do her own children belong to. So the children in Nazi Germany didn't even belong to their parents. They belonged to the Führer and the government, So, and they're being taught what to read, what the proper education is. It's not, the parents is just to have more babies, to build an army of soldiers, and so on and so forth. So it was a really dark film, but I would definitely recommend seeing that. So on the banned book list, if you had a chance to go through it, which of those books do you think is the most, probably, I mean, to me, all of the banned books are are important. But is there a specific book on that ban list that you believe needs to be brought back?
Well, I don't know which particular list you're looking at because there are many, many, many
Right.
banned book lists.
Well, the one I chose, I mean, the one that I just happened to see is the one from CBS. So, for instance, The Kite Runner by Khaled
Yeah.
Hosseini is one of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important book. It's a beloved book. It shows, gives you the culture of a place where these people were our enemy, and to see people who are your enemy as actual people, I think is really important. So certainly that would, that's one. I mean, there are just so many books that have been banned over the year, put on lists. The Grapes of Wrath that I mentioned earlier often appears on banned book lists. Jodi Picoult's books appear on banned book lists. And, I can't remember the title of the one that has been particularly targeted recently, but I did read that one because I did a Q&A with her when she was on book tour for that book. And in it, there's an abortion clinic, and kind of who's coming in and out and what's happening there. And it takes something very personal, but sort of illuminates it. And if you don't believe in abortion, okay, don't read it, but that doesn't mean that anybody else can't read it. And I don't see what the threat is, actually. And since in that book, she took every point of view. It's not just one-sided. I thought that was what was so interesting about it is, I think in real life, she's probably pretty liberal, but to be really kind of fair and balanced and looking all the way around and saying, people have different beliefs, that's fine, but don't tell me what to do. You don't have control. You shouldn't have control over my body when it's not your body. And I think that was, one position, but she was very, very good at sort of, illustrating the other side. So while I wouldn't put that book up in like the total great classics, but it's a very good example of how a book that's just was a popular novel that was read by many people, it's not really a threat. And I guess that's the thing that I think about is like, what is it a threat to exactly? And that if your beliefs are strong enough, reading a novel that shows the other point of view shouldn't be a threat to your own personal beliefs. But it might allow you to see the other side and have some empathy.
I definitely agree with that. That wouldn't be Speak, would it?
No, it's a different one. I'm sorry, I can't remember the title.
It's okay. That's okay. So, was there ever, onto the next question, was there ever a story or a narrative, whether one that you read or that you wrote, that was a challenge for you to complete or read through due to the nature of the content or the subject matter?
Well, are you talking about whether you're bored out of your mind and you can't stand it anymore? Or the characters, aren't very interesting?
No,
I'm sorry. I almost don't want to name a book, but there was a book that was a huge, huge, huge bestseller quite a few years back, was made into a very successful film. I could not read that book. I just could not get through it. I thought I just couldn't. But we went to see the film, and afterwards, usually you say the book is so much better than the movie. I could actually sit through the movie, and I came home and I thought, well, now I'm going to kind of flip through the book and see like what they did. And even then, I just couldn't. I just could not deal with that book. So sometimes I think it's not that the material necessarily is challenging, but that you just don't like it. And that's okay. We don't have to like everything. Some people like spinach and some people like apples. It's a very taste profile. I think there's some, so I guess I should tell you that from the time I was, whenever you start reading chapter books, so maybe third grade, I have read the first chapter, the last chapter, the second chapter, the penultimate chapter, working my way towards the middle. Yeah, sometimes, and the reason is, even as a kid, I had to know how it was going to end, or else I wasn't going to be able to sleep. That was it. I had to know Ramona was going to be okay on the last page. Heidi was going to be okay. Little Women, everybody was going to be alive. I had, except for poor,
Yeah.
but
Right.
I had to know how it ended so that I just wouldn't, I couldn't sleep. So the thing about doing it, there are a couple things about doing it that way. Sometimes I'll get, partway this way, partway that way, and think, yeah, I've read enough. And sometimes I meet in the middle. I'll meet in the middle and then continue to the end. And what that's done for me, actually, and it started when I was a kid, was I started looking at what the plot points were for how it was going to end. I guess what we'd call the structure of the book. Right. And I think that's really how I've learned structure, is through this sort of funny way that I read books.
So I'm sorry, you were saying,
but because how I read, and we're not talking about nonfiction, that's a whole other category. But because that's how I read, there are a lot of books where I'll, sometimes they're, they're books that are supposed to be so good for you, like this is supposed to be so good and so literary. I think I cannot get through this thing. And sometimes I think, oh my God, this is the best. But sometimes I just can't get through it. It's almost like, here's a box of Godiva chocolates. Now you have to eat every single one in an hour. You wouldn't be able to do it because you'd get, it's just it's like too rich, right? So sometimes to me, that gets to be too, I guess the word would be precious. And I don't like that kind of writing, but that's personal to me. Other people love that. And there isn't really a wrong or a right to that. It's just personal taste. But as far as something being gruesome or, I don't know where your question was really going with that, because I'm sort of more focused. I've been more focused on, is it interesting to me, or is it just not my taste, as opposed to, oh, this was so gross, I couldn't listen to it.
Something like that. So like you do read it, you listen to a lot of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle mysteries, and you like, what was it called, the Thursday Murder Club. But was there ever a subject matter of like a certain genre that you just wanted to stay away from because it was either too much for you to take in at that time, or that it was just difficult to get through because it was like
I'm not a big fan. I'm not a huge fan of fantasy, but I've read some. I love science fiction, film and television stuff, but I'm not. You would think then that I would really love to read science fiction, but I actually don't. I don't know why I can take it this way and in this form, but not in that form. I've read plenty of science fiction, but it's not my cup of tea. I'll tell you, and I love Harlan Coben's writing. He's another mystery writer and very prolific. And a lot of his stuff is turned into, television shows and stuff. But we just started listening to the new book. And I don't know the name because it's an audiobook. So I'm not seeing it sitting here. So I don't have it in front of my head. But the premise of that is that a man has bludgeoned to death his 3-year-old child and is now in prison. And we're having a very hard time getting through the first hour, because, I and especially if you're trying to go to sleep at night, the idea that somebody would bludgeon a 3-year-old, even if it's not his own child. Somebody did kill a 3-year-old, whether it is his, in the story. And we're having, I don't know, we're going to listen one more night tonight, and maybe we're going to have to pass on that one, even though I love his writing. But it's just that apparently we can't deal with a bludgeoned 3-year-old.
Yeah, that would be.
I mean, assume that the story is going to be how he proves that he didn't do it. Right. But, and I have a suspicion and we're listening to audio, so I can't look on the last page. But I have a suspicion that is not going to have been his actual child, that it will have been somebody else, and he didn't do it. This is just what I'm thinking, having listened to all of 15 minutes.
Yeah, but I mean, that kind of content.
Somewhere along the line, there was a child that was killed, and that's just hard.
Yeah,
for us,
definitely. So, of the books, I mean, I'm not sure if this is on this particular list here, but of all the books that are in your entire library collection, which one could you not live without, and why? And does that book hold special meaning for you?
Well, I would go back to Amelia Ann and the Magic Ring. I have it on a little, like how you would prop up a photo, an easel on my dresser. So I see it every day. And that book just means so much to me. I do live in a fire area. The one thing about books is that you can, for the most part, replace them. After the last big earthquake, a very good friend of ours, her house came off its foundation. She was a single mom, and all the other moms got together to help her empty her house. And it was red tagged, and we had to wear hard hats, and you could only go in like 2 people at a time for 10 minutes. And she had this incredible art book collection. And I was like, don't you want me to get your art books? She was like, no, I can replace all of them. So it's really interesting. I mean, if you could see the number of books that I have just even in this room, well, here, sometimes people feel sick if the computer screen moves. People watching, close your eyes. So, here are some of my research books. Over there are more of my research books. I have books almost every single room here. I just pulled 25 boxes of books out of my basement to give away. I mean, we're about to do a remodel that's going to add, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more big bookshelves about this, this big. So it's very, I've got a lot of books, but also I have a lot of research books. And so the thing is that they've kind of been creeping into other parts of the house, and I'd love to have them all nearby so that I could really access them easily. And some of those books, are very hard to find. In fact, I just gave one away to a friend who is a tea collector and tea connoisseur, and she helped me a lot when I was working on The Tea Girl of Hummingbird Lane. And I had a book from 1858 written by a man named Robert Graves, and I mailed it, wrapped it up, and sent it to her. And she was so excited because not only, she said, this is the oldest thing I own or have ever owned, but the other thing is, this is the man who snuck into China, stole some tea plants, and took them to India. So he's the person who broke China's hold on tea. Wow. And so it's a really significant, it's not only, really old, but it was really significant, and it was going to mean a tremendous amount to her. So I was really happy that, I could give it to her. But to find a book like that, just is very hard. Yeah. And I have a lot of my grandparents' books about China. My mother's longtime companion had grown up in China, and his father was a missionary there, had a huge library of books about China, and all of those are here too now. So this is stuff is really significant, and I'm gonna just look over here for a second. Like I said, I think most of them, some of them I could easily replace, but there's certain books that it would be very hard. There's one up here, Chinese Mother Goose Rhymes. And this was actually my father's when he was a child. And, something like that, I probably could find it maybe, but it would be very hard to find.
Wow.
I have a first edition of the Story of Ping that was my father's book that actually has been in 2 museum exhibitions, because it's, yes, you could buy that new, but it wouldn't be a first edition. So I think it's books like that that really matter to me, and yet as I'm trying to get rid of books to make room for all these new books that are going to come in when I get my new shelves, it's really hard to part with them. And, there's some where it's like you remember when you read it.
Yes.
You're never going to read it again, but you remember where you were and where you were in your life and what it meant to you in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think the 2 oldest, not to go off tangent here, but I think the 2 oldest books in my collection it's a book of the Holy Scriptures, and it was actually compiled by a woman named Lady Magnus of the Jewish Federation, and it's from like 1890. That's the oldest book in my entire collection that I can think of right
hang
now.
on. I'm going to Here is my family's Bible.
Oh my God.
And
wow.
And one of the things they have in here are pressed flowers from Gettysburg, from the Civil War, and of course I don't know what year this one is. The thing on the front says 1854. So this has been in my family since 1854. So, and it has every birth and death written in it, and every marriage.
That is amazing. That's like a treasure piece. That's something that is irreplaceable.
Exactly. That's one of the things in when the fire comes, it's like, okay, this one has to go in the car.
Yeah. The second one I have to say for me would be Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. I have a first edition from like what was the year that he wrote it?
A long time ago, we can say.
Yeah. But I think it's the first edition, and actually wasn't mine, not to go off tangent again, but in high school they were withdrawing books from the library at the end of the spring semester right before summer. So I think I had maybe 30 to 50 books in my collection. The reason why I have probably, I don't want to count that many, but I have probably over 1,000, because about half the books from the withdrawn section came with me, and that's how I ended up with scoliosis, and this is why my library has tripled in size. So, yeah. So, besides your book release, are there any organizations or charities or special events taking place that our viewers should look into or donate or participate in now that you can think of offhand?
Like what kind of thing? What do you?
I'm sorry.
I don't think I quite understand.
For your book that's being released in June, but are there other organizations, charities, or special events that our viewers should look into from your perspective that you've seen recently? Like, do you take part in any kind of charity or like organizations, book clubs, that kind of thing, or library functions?
I'm on the board of LA Opera. I'm on the board of the Music Center. I'm on the board of something called the Trusteeship, which is the Southern California chapter of the International Women's Forum, which is an international organization of prominent women that started out as like the first in your field. Obviously, we're past that, which is a good thing. It's interesting, you know, because we're working that the tour is now set, but there are a lot of things that have to happen around it. So we're doing, you know, this big snail mail mailing for different events around the country, but also I'm getting all the stuff ready to put all the events up on my website. And I would say a good third of my events are for different organizations where this will be a fundraiser for whatever that organization is. And so you know, one of the things that I really enjoy doing, and it's something I can give, it's like my version of community service, is if it's a library, a hospital, AAUW, it's the American Association of University Women. They raise money to help put younger women through school. There are, you know, different literacy. Organizations. I'm doing something for the Newport Beach Public Library Foundation, and they raise money for their literacy programs. And this will be, I think, the third or fourth time that I've done an event for them. I think the fourth. So, you know, I think this is a wonderful thing that writers can do, is that, you know, yes, we're selling our books, but at the same time, these different organizations can use that as their fundraiser. Not the selling of the books, but, you know, come eat this piece of chicken and listen to Lisa, or, you know, whoever the author is. And then as far as book clubs, you know, I join a lot of book clubs on Zoom. During the worst part of the pandemic, when everybody was at home and Zoom took off and, you know, everybody was feeling isolated, I was visiting sometimes as many as 4 book clubs a day.
Wow. My goodness.
So right now, because I'm getting ready for the new book to come out, I'm just trying to stick to just 2 a week, so you can see a big difference there. But to me, this has been a really wonderful way to talk to readers, not just in this country, but around the world. I've met with book clubs in Australia, the United Arab Emirates, Italy, France, England, Iran one time.
Wow.
So it's a really great, you know, places in South America, Brazil. It's a really wonderful way to reach readers, but in this country especially, I think, because authors, when they go out on tour, you know, there's sort of the top 10 cities. There are the second tier 10 cities. Sometimes, you know, a place will invite you, and yes, they'll pay you more money to come there because it's not on the official tour. I have quite a few of those on this tour coming up. But there are a lot of places that never see a writer, you know, that they're never going to come to your town. And so this is a really nice way for people to actually see and interact with a writer, is just to have, you know, a half hour, an hour on Zoom together.
That's cool. Yeah, I'm going to be going to.
I answered your question exactly, but that seems to be my variety of answers to cover it.
But you mentioned like the fundraiser, the board of LA Opera, which I think the last time I ended up seeing an opera at the Dorothy Chandler was the Flying Dutchman, which was, I think, way before 2014. Yeah. So we haven't really seen a lot of the operas there.
There have been some wonderful productions. You'll have to come back and see more.
Yeah, like Peleus and Melisande was this last one. My uncle went to go see it. He said it was
beautiful.
It was fabulous. Yeah. So now we go to the follow-up where we get to Lady Tan. So without giving too much away from what I was able to get through so far, it's interesting how in Lady Tan there's a it was actually not in the book itself, but I read something on, let me see, something about, it was mentioned in the Island of Sea Women, actually, aphorism, where it says every woman who enters the sea carries a coffin on her back. But it's interesting. There's a lot, you seem to have a lot of, from the books of yours that I've read so far, I just literally just had it on a sec. So yeah, so an aphorism is a pithy observation that contains a general truth, like if it's not broke, don't fix it. So when you're doing your research, like for Lady Tan or for Snowflower and the Secret Fan or Island of Sea Women, um, in your research, do you keep or have you heard it passed down from your parents, from your grandparents, of these aphorisms that have influenced
It's a
the
combination
writing?
of things. I mean, sometimes it's stuff that I've heard a million times in my own family. Sometimes but often it does come out of the research. And, you know, let's just say aphorisms in China in the 1960s and 70s during the Cultural Revolution are going to be very different than what was in the Ming Dynasty, or even what was 100 years ago. So, you know, and then there are also the differences in China with, you have the Han majority people, but then there are another 56 ethnic minorities, and all of those minorities have their own sayings. And so, you know, let's see, the Tigrill of Hummingbird Lane is about the Aka people. Snowflower and the Secret Fan is about the Yao ethnic minority. So they each have their own aphorisms, but I think the best aphorisms have a universal quality to them, as you pointed out. And the one that you just said, you know, is from the Island of Sea Women. And that's very specific to what these women do. They are free divers. They, you know, take a deep breath. They dive down as deep as 60 feet, deep enough to get the bends, stay underwater 2 to 4 minutes on that single breath. And they harvest seafood, and they're the breadwinners in their families. Yep. And the husbands stay home. They take care of the kids. They do the cooking, stuff like that. And that aphorism really reflects their lives in the sense that every time they enter the sea, they're carrying a coffin on their back. They could die because there's so many different ways for them to die in the sea. I mean, literally dozens of ways for them to die. But it's interesting because when you said that, I thought you were going to say something about Lady Tan, because there are a lot of aphorisms in there about women and women's bodies and women's lives.
Yes.
And, you know, it only struck me when you just said that, but isn't it true in a way that every woman, you know, it doesn't even have to do with going into the sea, that you are kind of carrying a coffin on your back, that we are vulnerable to certain kinds of things that men are not. And yeah, I just hadn't thought about that until it was just, you kind of steered me in a different direction. And certainly in Lady Tan, I think this is, you know, very much at the heart of that book is the vulnerability that we have because of our bodies.
I was just going to say, because on my Kindle, I was actually, because I'm still in the middle of reading it, I would bookmark certain pages of those aphorisms. But you mentioned, like, for Lady Tan, where the body, I think one of the aphorisms was "blood is the master" or something like that on one of those pages. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But because of because there's so many, do you keep like a notebook or a binder with a lot of these aphorisms? Yes. And is there like a specific, like what you said, there's different aphorisms that were said in the 1960s in China versus.
I certainly collect, you know, focus for certain books, but I do have a notebook right behind the computer that has, you know, pages and pages of them, and many of them are divided. You know, some are more Confucian, some were very specific to the Cultural Revolution, Mao, you know, because he had his little red book, right? So that's just like page after page of things that he said. And yeah, so it's kind of divided up, but not, you know, it's a spiral binder, so it's
right.
You know, it's the way I would do it, but it's not thoroughly organized. And then when I'm working on a particular book, I'm really focusing on that time period.
That's cool.
And that yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, and this was interesting because I was very surprised, and I didn't realize it started at this young of an age. foot binding.
Mhm.
The descriptions, these vivid descriptions, makes you feel like you're actually in the room witnessing what's going on. You are either the main character or you're one of, like right now, I think Lady Tan she hasn't produced a son yet, not to give anything away, but she has three daughters. Islan, I think, is her youngest. She's just now going through the process. There was only when I was reading it, there's this, I don't remember which, it's in one of my art history books, this photograph of this Chinese young woman. She must have been either in her late teens or early 20s, and she was sitting upright. And I looked at her feet, and I had never seen anything that was part of the culture that had to be done. When in your research, because I was actually going to look this up and I didn't get to. When was around the time that foot binding actually ended in China?
Well, it depends on what you so the official time is 1949 when Mao came into power. But the country is big, and at that time communication was not very good. And so there were many areas that didn't hear that it had been outlawed for years. Like I just didn't get the word, And then the other thing is, just because somebody tells you something is over, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to do it. And I always use, well, there are two examples I use. The first is, suppose tonight on television the president came on, and it doesn't matter whether a Republican or a Democrat. Suppose he came on television tonight and said, from now on, women can no longer pierce their ears. And some people would say, oh, whatever the president says, I'll do. And some people would say, for whatever the president says, forget it. And some people forget the whole red state, blue state thing. I like my pierced ears. Don't tell me what to do. The other example is, suppose tonight he came on television and said, from now on, we're no longer going to celebrate Thanksgiving. Now, I do think that around the country, for a couple minutes, you'd hear this huge sigh of relief from women. Oh, thank God, I don't have to make that. But then I think people would say, well, now, wait a minute. This is a uniquely American tradition. It's when our family all comes together. We have our own particular traditions about food. Our pumpkin pie is better than your pumpkin pie. We put whatever, I put lapchang in my stuffings. In the South, a lot of people put oysters in their stuffing. There are regional differences.
Yeah.
In some families, you go out in the backyard and play football, you play or watch, you play touch football, you sit down and watch football, or you're is the kind of family that drinks too much and passes out in the mashed potatoes. So every family has their traditions, but the main thing is this American holiday with these deep traditions. And if somebody said today, that's it, we're never doing it again, people would go out of their brains, they wouldn't. They would resist it. So, it did linger for quite a long time because, for those two reasons. And first, that people didn't hear about it. And second, sort of like, well, why should we do that? We've been doing this for 1,000 years.
Yeah. So was there, the ones, let's see, what's the thoughts of assisting? Yeah. Did you, from your own family alone, did anyone in your family that you know of ever went through the foot binding process?
Oh, my great-grandfather had 4 wives, and his third wife, although she was big-footed, her mother had bound feet, and her shoes were about 1.5 inches long. The family still has them. They are this big. They are so tiny. I have a pair of bound foot, actually almost like galoshes just over there. I could get up and show them to you, but they're bigger. They're like this, but hers, they're just tiny, tiny, tiny.
Oh my God. What was it like doing the research on the foot binding? Did you cringe at some of these descriptions? And did you actually use some of those descriptions in
Yeah,
in the
I mean,
actual
yes, if I'm going to be accurate, I have to,
accurate?
I do the research and I try to figure out what actual, what the process was and what the dangers were and what were the herbs that were used and what were the techniques and but the funny thing is, as I'm writing, I'm not worrying about it too much. I'm just in it and trying to get it right and be, as you said, but how I also feel is to just be in the room. And I remember with Snowflower and the Secret Fan, one of the very early readers said, "You're not coming out to against foot binding." It's like, well, that's not my role to come out against foot binding. My
Right.
role is to be in the room with them. And hopefully people who read it will think, aren't going to think, hey, this is such a great idea. Let's start it up again. Nobody's going to think that. I think you can trust readers to come to the right conclusion, I think, and to find their own conclusions.
Yeah. Another thing about Lady Tan is this is where we see, and maybe you can just go over the name. Her last name starts with an X, but how do you pronounce it? Tan?
Oh, so Tan is actually her family name, and Yan
Family name, I'm sorry.
Shen is what we would call the first name, her given name.
And that's, I'm sorry, how do you say it?
Yan Shen. Yan Shen.
Yan Shan.
Yan
Okay.
Shen.
Yan Shan. So she and Mei Ling Shi. So Mei Ling would be the family name, correct?
She is the family.
Oh, she is the family name. I'm sorry. Okay, yeah. So we have Tan and Mei Ling, who are again these two young girls who are brought up together, each from different classes, and yet there's that a lot. And I'm to my understanding is that most of your books have to do with the strength and bond of women, especially with this particular title, Lady Tan's Circle of Women, the women who are there. It's kind of like transcends the same way as the Island of Sea Women. And I wish I could remember the name of the two girls who are brought up.
Young Suk and Mija.
Yeah.
In that book.
Right.
Mija.
So there's a lot there's a lot of the spiritual strength and bond of women who are there to support each other, even if their professions or their livelihood means that death could come at any time in what they are dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
What was that's like a common thread, a common theme that is throughout your stories. And I know that I think on one of these articles I read is about the emotion and the strength of women. Is that what made you decide to focus on the strength of women as a common thread?
Most of my readers are women. I think this also has a lot to do with how I think about history and how we learn history. We tend to learn history in what I think of as the front line of history, the wars, the dates, the presidents, the generals, the prime ministers. But if you take one step back, who's there? It's women, it's children, it's families, and they're there for every single step of the way. And within that, there are women who have done extraordinary things. I'm sure you've read about me that, I'm interested in stories about women that have been lost, forgotten, deliberately covered up. So each of these books, it's looking at a group of women like Island of Sea Women, the Henyo free divers. And this one, it's this, Tan Shan, a real woman who was a doctor in the Ming Dynasty in the late 1400s. It's remarkable. And so I just think about this a lot, actually, that if we look at sort of the body of Western, we'll just limit ourselves to Western literature.
Right.
And that most of those books, almost all of them, including the novels, were written by men. And, I think often, like, how would Anna Karenina be different if it had been written by a woman?
Interesting.
How, just all of these books where there's a woman protagonist, but it was written by a man. And if you think about it, there weren't very many women who were being published. You have the Bronte sisters, certainly Emily Dickinson, George Sand, Jane Austen, of course. But it's not until you get to about into the 1920s, so about 100 years ago, that Virginia Woolf starts publishing fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And even after that, it's very slow before women are being published in a consistent, regular way and being read. And I would go so far as to say that it's really only in the last 10 years that when you look at the bestseller list, you actually see, and in fact, because I do look every week, some weeks there are even more women writers of the top 10 bestsellers than there are men. But for years and years and years, there were no women on that list, and maybe one and maybe two, but it took a long time before women were being published and read in a consistent way. And so what does that tell you? This idea of telling women's stories, no matter what kind they are, if it's a detective, if it's a doctor, if it's a romance that's taking place in New York City right now today,
Right.
if it's the lessons in chemistry taking place in the 1950s, it has a little bit of a historic aspect to it, comedic part, that it doesn't, there's so many stories that have yet to be told about women and by women. And I think that's the critical point, by women telling women's stories. And then the other piece of that is that women have unique relationships. Yes, no matter who we are on earth, somewhere along the line, we all had a mother and a father. You may know them, you may not, they may like you, they may not, but we all had one. Some people have children, some people don't. Some people find a significant other in life, some people do, some people don't.
Mm-hmm.
But what is unique for women is female friendship. And this is unlike any relationship we have in any aspect of our lives. And it's very different from men's friendship in the sense that we will tell a friend something that we wouldn't tell our boyfriend, lover, husband, mother, children. It's a very unique kind of intimacy. And of course, whenever you open your heart, you're vulnerable.
Yeah.
And so I think this is why, female friendship, it's complicated. And it's something that sustains us. It's something that gives us bravery and courage and endurance. But it can also really hurt us. And so I think about both of those things at once, and that there are these places, I think, where if I see the sort of dark shadow side of friendship, I want to go in there and poke around a little bit. And then in the case of Lady Tan, she's effectively an orphan,
Mm-hmm.
from the beginning, goes to live with her grandparents, but I think she thinks of herself as being orphaned. And she, there are a lot of people around her who are taking good care of her. Miss Chen, Miss Zhao, her concubine, and her grandmother, obviously, and Poppy, her servant. Right there you have three people who are really looking after her. But I don't think she recognizes it exactly. And I think this is another thing that's, I don't know if it's unique to women, but it is something that affects a lot of women, and I would put myself in this, is that sometimes we don't recognize when people love us.
Mm.
We don't necessarily recognize it. And she goes a long time before she understands both that there are people already who are taking care of her and loving her, but also that she's building her own circle and creating this circle where it's not just about what they can give her, but it's what she can give them and what they can each give each other. And I just, again, would say that I think this is something very unique to women, and how we find support. It's not just friendship and let's have fun, but, you know, the emotional support that we get from other women.
That's amazing. One of the things on your website, and I'm not sure if this was a leading factor into it, but this was something I had never heard of before. I just happened to check your site. Maybe it was like the last week I finally checked it out. You mentioned something that you wrote a collection of essays for this. I forgot the name of the title, but you mentioned something of having this this condition, and I hope I say it right.
Ankylosing spondylitis.
Yes. Now that was something that you've had since you were in your like early teens, but I was just wondering, was that a leading factor into you questioning when it came to medical doctors and whom you consulted? Was doing your research into these essays, was that a leading factor or something that led up to you doing research about Lady Tan?
No,
It wasn't. It was just
completely separate. Yeah.
okay. Okay. But this is something that you're still going through. They gave you a specific
It's a lifelong condition. It's a disease. It won't go away.
Jeez. And it
It's an
doesn't.
disease.
Jeez. And it continues to affect you even on the book tours, which I also read, like 6 weeks, 12 weeks.
Yeah.
And it just flares up on just occasion.
Well, I give myself an injection once a week. I take medication every day. I do all my exercises to stay as mobile as I possibly can.
That's good. That's good. And what?
I mean, there are all kinds of things that people have to do if they have a chronic condition, and I do my best to do them all. I'm not always good at it, but I do my best.
I like how you say that we have to be proactive when it comes to our health, which is kind of the same thing that I was just going to say, there seems to be that connection to Lady Tan about being pro.
There is, but you know, she really was a healer,
right?
And a real person, and you know, she was in this unique position to actually be in the room with her women and girl patients, where male doctors, as you know, because you've read the book, in that time were not allowed to be in the see a woman patient. They could be behind a screen or a curtain or outside the room, and then somebody would go back and forth as the go-between. If somebody was really, 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 really sick and the doctor needed to take the pulse, they'd, pull her arm through the curtain, wrap it in a handkerchief, and he'd feel through that. That's really not the way to take a pulse, So male doctors couldn't see like someone's complexion. Were they pale? Were they flushed? Was there a rash? What did the rash look like? Was it scaly? Was it oozing? All of these things that we know that doctors even today, yes, we've learned to visit the doctor on Zoom now.
Right.
But even that, sometimes you're like getting close. He's like, get closer so that you can see. Because, it's so much a part of being a physician is observing. Exactly. And so she had that ability where they didn't. And then even more important, that she could ask questions directly about their health, about their symptoms, without a go-between. And, I love my husband very much, and I don't feel particularly shy about my body, but I really wouldn't want him acting as the go-between between me and my gynecologist. I'm in one room, the gynecologist is over there, and my husband in and asking questions and relaying them back there, or having my son do it. Today I'm just like, yeah, I could pass on that. So fact that she could do that was really important. And we also know that even today, doctors often kind of poo-poo women's illnesses as just being kind of an emotional thing, and they don't take them as seriously as they
Right.
should. But she paid attention to a woman's emotions, that this was part of the overall picture. And this is why her book, is still in print today, not just in China, but in English and many languages around the world, because so many of her treatments are still used in traditional Chinese medicine today.
That's interesting because it's interesting how she uses the qi to diagnose to diagnose these conditions. So if you can explain in a nutshell, what was the inspiration behind your writing Lady Tan? What made you want to go into it?
Okay, and that's got to be our last question because we've been on.
Right. Right. Okay.
So I thought I knew what the next book was going to be. It was going to require a trip deep, deep, deep into the interior, a very remote part of China. We'll just say very, very remote part of China. And then the pandemic happened. There was no way I could go in 2020, no way in 2021, no way actually even, I think it was only the end of 2022 or the beginning of this year that they finally lifted the really strict quarantine rules. But I don't know that I'd even feel comfortable today going into a really remote part of China, in case I got sick. I mean, we all know, even though you have your vaccines, there are people who still get COVID. So I don't want to be in a place hundreds of miles from a hospital or whatever. And so that just, I couldn't do it. And I spent a lot of months just, it was locked down. I couldn't go to China. I couldn't go to the different research libraries that I go to because they were all closed to all the libraries. All 7 research libraries at UCLA were closed. All the different archives I go to were closed, and they were closed, most of them for well over a year. So I couldn't do what I ordinarily do. And then I showed you these shelves, and there was one day in October 2020, I was just walking by here, and the spine of one of the books kind of popped out at me. I don't know why. Gray with a darker gray lettering. I pulled it down. Reproducing Women, Pregnancy and Childbirth in the Ming Dynasty. I looked. I'd had that book on my shelf for 10 years and had never opened it. I sat down right over there, right that minute, started reading, and on page 19, I saw a mention of Tan Shen. That she sounds kind of interesting. I'm going to look her up. And within, 2 minutes, I found, I have it right here on my desk, her book online, and I ordered it, and I had it within 24 hours. So from, usually I think about a book for years before I decide this is the one. And this time it was about 26 hours from when that spine jumped out at me to when I decided this is what I'm going to be doing.
That is really awesome. Just little things that can just be an inspiration that you don't really think about it. That's awesome. There were some other questions that I was going to ask you, but since you have to go now, maybe we can maybe later on we can go back to this. We can go back to these questions about on Gold Mountain, because that was one opera I wanted to see, and I was actually recovering. So
I don't think there are going to be many people still watching at this point. So.
Yeah, that's okay. All right. So, but anyway, Lisa, thank you so much, and I appreciate the fact that you sent me the physical copy. I love reading ebooks too, to a point, but I like the physical. So thank you so much for sending me this. And yeah, looking forward to reading the remainder of the story. And I will leave that review on, what is it called? NetGalley, I think. NetGalley?
NetGalley is just the ebook version.
The ebook version.
For reviewers. So, but you couldn't open it, so don't worry about it, because since you already have a heart.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lisa, and good luck on this next wonderful book tour. Okay?
Thank you so much, and this was great fun. Thank you. I hope we get to do it again one of these days.
I hope so too. You take care, okay?
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Well, it was wonderful interviewing Lisa C. today. She gave me some great notes to take away from, including I forgot that her mother what is a writer. I thought her father was too, but he's an anthropologist. But it's interesting how it's not on those notes. It's actually over here. A lot of great notes that I took down from our interview today. But her message about the biggest obstacle facing our readers today, it's about banning books. It's about challenging these books. And I think, what was it, yesterday or today, I was reading something about, I think, Texas is not, instead of going through the whole banning book thing, why don't they just take down their libraries? Who are you to tell others? And this is what she had to say, which was interesting. Who does the government think that, or who in charge is to say what we can and cannot read as individuals? And so what I loved, I think what I'm going to be spreading her message is what she says, and this is from research: the more you read, the more empathy you have. And for some reason, our country today is cutting down on empathy. We don't seem to be having this ability to be open to others from reading others' works, like, for instance, Khaled Hosseini's The Kite Runner, which is on the banned list. It was written by an author who's from a country that has been enemies with the United States. Well, here it happens to be an author of this story from an enemy country who was not an enemy. This person is a human, and they're telling it from their perspectives. And so it allows you to gain access into the people that Americans consider to be enemy countries because of what happened, because of how we've been affected. And so why is it that our country, our government is tending to cut down on people who are wanting to embrace more empathy, willing to be able to share openness with each other? There were some questions that I was going to ask her about on Gold Mountain, but that'll have to be another time. She doesn't and to my understanding, she's right. There's only so much that of information that we can tolerate in a limited amount of time, and an hour is usually good. But even then, I could see today that the questionnaire itself was about 40 to 50 minutes this time, because interviewees have a lot to say. So even though it should have been only an hour, maybe like an hour 15, I will usually set aside 90 minutes just to make sure that we cover everything, or that we are able to cover all the questions that I would like. And if the interviewee wishes to cut off, and that's fine at that particular time, then I am totally open to that. So, but it was a wonderful experience talking with her about her collection of aphorisms, that incredible Bible that she has from 1854. So yeah, the next time I will have to ask her about On Gold Mountain, because I didn't actually read the book yet. I think I will save that for a later interview if I'm able to interview her again, either later this year or possibly even next year, because I do want to ask her about the process of the libretto she wrote for the opera version of her story and her writing routine. But since this is the end of the video, I do want to go over, because she posted this on Facebook, about her writing routine. She says one of the most important lessons that as her mother was a writer, her mother said, write 1,000 words a day. So that has become like a type of religious routine for her, is to write 1,000 words a day, which is basically around 4 pages. And it's interesting to say that when it comes to research, that is the first longest part of the process. Writing, surprisingly, is the shortest part. The editing is the second longest part of the process. And according to Lisa, each book that she works on takes about 2 years, but that's when she's actually working on the book. she was saying in the video that it could take years for her to consider even writing, even coming up with the subject on what to write about. Then when she gets into it, she doesn't focus on fiction. She only focuses on nonfiction research, and she has to stay in that mindset. So, for instance, in Lady Tan's Circle, this takes place during the Ming Dynasty in the 15th century. And so, yeah, the story begins in 1469. So, and this was based on a real woman, physician, if you will, a healer, and how she was, and how Lisa emphasizes with women, working with women, helping, like women helping women. That just seems to be a very admirable theme and thread that is connected throughout each of the stories that she's written. I'm going to have to read the remainder of her stories. I think I either read Shanghai Girls or the T-Bird Girl of Hummingbird Lane. I do not remember, but I will have to take another look and read more of her stories. So I hope that you guys enjoyed her interview today with me. And I'm hoping to get some more interviews. And if anyone noticed, in the background, there was a three-panel folding screen. Those are 6 canvases that I stapled together. And I basically have been recording every minute that I have painted those canvases. So I'm not sure if I will be able to create a video of the entire thing. Maybe there's a way I can speed it up on Canva. I'm still pretty new to Canva, to be honest with you. But so far, I'm amazed that I am still able to hold a paintbrush and paint without much trouble. Writing, on the other hand, is another issue because it's constantly repetitive, and if you guys can see, I don't really have much range of motion in my hand. And yeah, so writing is still difficult. Painting, because it's not so much repetitive, and I have more free range, it's not as difficult. So we will see how the folding screen will finally come to fruition. I will have my own folding screen. I was going to try to order one on Amazon, but I kind of wanted to put my own artistic flair onto this room. I call it a room divider, basically. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's interview, and I'm looking forward to the next interview, whoever that's going to be. I've already sent out some more inquiries, and I will see you guys the next time. In the meantime, keep on reading. Lady Tan will be released to the public in June this year. See you later.